It is 11 o'clock on the dot. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Hello, everyone. I am Jeff Gorey, the Director of Energy Services here at IAMU, the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities. I'm excited to have Stephanie with us today to talk about a few things. Before we get going, I did want to make a few announcements. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel to be watched later by other members that could not attend today. So we are recording, just want to let you know that. Also wanted to make an announcement. If your municipal utility is not participating in Muni Bucks and you have a need for a self-managed rebate program in a box, please reach out to me. You can say that in the chat if you're interested. I would also say that IEDA or IAMU is currently working on a Iowa Energy Center grant dealing with doing assessments for schools. So if you have a school district that's on your network that you know may need some energy assessments or maybe is looking to reduce their bills or pursue a few energy efficiency projects, we're currently soliciting for letters of support to submit that grant to do school energy assessments. So with that, I think that's all the announcements I have. Today, we're really excited to have Stephanie.Weisenbach from the Iowa Economic Development Office. Stephanie is a program manager at IEDA and is currently the program manager for the Energy Infrastructure Revolving Loan Program. Stephanie is here today to talk to us about the EIRLP, Energy Infrastructure Revolving Loan Program, as well as a brief update on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the federal infrastructure bill that was passed recently. So with that, I'll hand it off to Stephanie. Thanks for being here, and go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks for the invitation, and for all of you that are able to make it today with spring break for a lot of people. So, as Jeff had mentioned, I'm a program manager with the IEDA. I've been here for a number of years, involved with various energy programs, and have interacted with IAMU members on other initiatives as well. So, so with that.
Yep. One thing real quick, Stephanie, sorry, I just forgot one last announcement. Everyone who's on the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will collect those questions, and there's a few breaks in the presentation reserved for Q&A sessions. So if you have a question, please throw it in the chat. We'll make sure that it gets answered. Sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah, no problem. Yep. So just going to go over what the agenda is, going to give you a brief introduction about our office and the Energy Center in case you weren't aware, and then go into the Energy Infrastructure Revolving Loan Program. And then a few highlights from the IIJA law that was passed, with an emphasis on programs that you know, may be of particular interest to municipal utilities, and then some suggestions on how to learn more and stay informed on some of these energy developments. So about our office here at IEDA, so we have the Iowa Energy Office, which is the broader umbrella within IEDA. We're a designated state energy office by the U.S. Department of Energy, have been for a number of years, and we manage a diverse mix of state, federal, and utility funded programs. So we also have the Iowa Energy Center, which was established in Iowa in the late 1990s and was formerly housed at Iowa State University. We've had it in here at IEDA since 2017 due to legislation that transferred it here. The mission that we operate under is to support activities that align with the 7 key focus areas of the Iowa Energy Plan that was developed in 2016. We'll go over those today. Many of you are probably aware of that initiative. We have a board that was appointed by the governor, provides oversight to our programs, and we operate a grant and a loan program and committees that oversee and make recommendations to the board for awards under both of those. And today we'll be talking specifically about the loan program. So the loan program has been within the Iowa Energy Center since the late 90s, and as a previous name, the Alternate Energy Revolving Loan Program. And once it transitioned here, soon after that in 2019, the board decided to appoint a subcommittee to look at the statutory basis for that program and suggest potential revisions. When it was transferred over here, it was transferred as is, and there was language in Iowa code specific to that program. program. So the board wanted to take a closer look at that. There's a subcommittee that met several times for that board in 2020, and we conducted a stakeholder survey to get an understanding of what the stakeholders may want. And we created a program proposal for the board, which then authorized us to pursue legislative changes based on that proposal. And then ultimately there is legislation approved in 2021 and signed by Governor Reynolds. And that legislation amended Iowa Code, which also discontinued the Alternate Energy Revolving Loan Program, created the Energy Infrastructure Revolving Loan Program. It also clarified eligible borrowers, which I'll get into in a bit, and allowed some costs related to program administration. It created a definition of energy infrastructure, which is pretty broad, and you'll see the definition here, but basically, you know, it's a variety of improvements related to, you know, electricity or gas. So it is still focused on implementing construction-oriented projects, and developing infrastructure just has a different purpose. So for development of the program after that, we've developed and adopted administrative rules for the program, which can be found in the administrative code. And the rules also provided that the board would approve policies and procedures at least annually. And that aspect of the program allows some of the program rules to be adapted as the board's priorities and vision changes. And certainly we can incorporate lessons learned as the program evolves and update those policies and procedures. We have a manual that clarifies, you know, what's in Iowa Code and what's in administrative rules, and additional requirements that the board has in place. And you can find that on our website. I will have the link here for you in the slides that you can use, assuming you'll be able to get a copy of these slides afterwards, and be able to look up the policies and procedures to basically get a one-stop shop for all that you would need to know about the program requirements and the process. And then, of course, you know, additional questions, I'm fielding those as well. For the funding available in the program, we have approximately $14 million available for new loans. Our procedures, our policies and procedures state that the board can approve up to $5 million in loans per quarter. They do make the loan amounts, the loan awards on a quarterly basis. The minimum loan award amount is $50,000. The maximum is $2.5 million, which is quite a bit more than the previous program. And the program can cover up to 75% of the project's costs. And the remainder could include some costs that may otherwise be ineligible for our funding award, such as soft costs or potentially costs incurred before the loan committee's recommendation of the loan. And really our intention here was to, you know, make the loan program more attractive to projects that, you know, would be seeking financial assistance for as much of their project costs as possible. For the eligible and ineligible costs, the first for real and personal property, you know, really that equipment and the property of the project, the materials and equipment necessary for the site and construction and installation and labor, and any costs associated with maintenance and operation and repair of the project. We have a list of ineligible costs that I don't need to read every single detail of, but a lot of them are the soft costs, and really we're, you know, making sure our program is focused on the implementation, but understanding that there are some other costs, and we could also count those as match that the applicant could incur to make the project happen. For eligible borrowers, we have three main categories, and we're focused on, you know, businesses that are incorporated or organized in Iowa or otherwise authorized to do business here. And those could include businesses that are operated as sole proprietors with a registered trade name. So it could be individuals that, you know, really are operating as a business. And we can also loan to rural electric cooperatives and to municipal utilities. For the purposes of the webinar today, I would want to clarify that there are several types of municipal utilities that are eligible borrowers under the program. And, you know, the definition is that we're working with, you know, really being subject to public audit requirements, owning infrastructure, and providing services to the city. We found that, you know, the legal definition of municipal utility required us to formulate something, you know, specific to this program that we felt was reasonable and consistent with other definitions, but also simple enough to explain and understand. So, and we also will expect the utilization of bond counsel for a loan application from a municipal utility, and then the subsequent processes. So that really came about through further consultation with IMU and understanding, how to best accommodate the program to municipal utilities and ensuring, all of the information and the right parties are involved. So ineligible borrowers would be businesses that are not located or operating in Iowa. However, a business that could be located and operating here upon completion of a project may be eligible for a loan. So really, trying to be accommodating towards still attracting investment from outside of Iowa, if that's really going to result in, a business being located and operating here. We're also looking at, potential history with compliance violations and other state programs and rules, and those individuals or businesses would be ineligible. Regents, institutions, community colleges, state agencies, cities, except for municipal utilities, counties, and school districts. So, and nonprofits. So, and then the loan term and interest for the program, we can go up to 15 years for the loan term. Certainly we prefer 5 to 10 years if the cash flow and return investment justifies that shorter loan term. We'll look at those factors and other financing for the project and try to, work with the applicant on that loan term. Certainly people can request the loan term they want in the application, but as we go through the review process and work with an underwriter here within our sister agency, Iowa Finance Authority, we can kind of hammer out what that loan term would be and what the loan committee would recommend for the board to approve, and still consult with the applicant in the process as well. The standard interest rate for our program is currently 2%, and that's an interest rate that we have in our policies and procedures, and we expect that could be updated annually as needed. And really, we expect most loans to have that 2% interest rate. There may be some rare exceptions where a lower interest rate might be, might have some merit based on some cash flow or some risk associated, or potentially a higher interest rate as well. So really there could be some deviation, but we really are sticking with the 2% for all intents and purposes. We have committed in the rules that we won't exceed the Wall Street Journal prime rate as of the date of the board approval, to really ensure that we're being competitive and offering lower cost financing than some of our borrowers could find in the marketplace. For the collateral of the program, we have several options, and our preferred ones from this list is really the irrevocable letter of credit that's more specific to businesses, and that's something that a business would get from their lending institution, and provides that that institution would pay back the loan in event of default. Is a kind of a summary way of putting it, and many lenders are familiar with what that letter is, and that may have a small cost to providing it. In theory, it's the same lender that business does other business with, and so they have that financial relationship there already. But we have other forms of collateral as well. Real property would be like a mortgage on a property, and that may be more common for projects that have an agriculture purpose to it, and that's maybe the more practical option for that applicant. And then dedicated CD or a corporate guarantee from a separate business. And in the instance for municipal utilities, we would be likely looking at utility revenue or reserve funds to pledge as collateral. And if these forms of collateral are inadequate, and if the applicant has another proposal, we can consider that. But part of the application is the applicant pledging which collateral they can make available. So for the eligibility of the project, we have some criteria that we want to make sure has been met, that the project should be located in Iowa or for the primary use or benefit of Iowans. making sure if there's some portion outside of Iowa, there may be some, utility infrastructure that's on the border or something, the applicant would have to demonstrate that the project mostly benefits Iowans. We want to make sure that the project has a certain market and end users and is not a purely speculative project. And we might make a loan contingent on that sort of information being confirmed. The project should develop energy infrastructure as defined in Iowa code, and certainly we will and continue to field questions on that definition and whether certain project types fit that, and that's fine, but that is one of the eligibility criteria. And then the borrower must be the owner, contract purchaser, lessee, or other interest holder of the real property where the project is located. We also have clarified that if it's a project that's energy use for the borrower's personal residence, that's not an eligible project. That was really, born out of some lessons learned in the previous program and aligning the program with what the board wants to see here. The project purpose here, we have several purposes, and these are outlined in Iowa code, and they align quite well with the Iowa Energy Plan, but are a little bit more focused on the infrastructure side of things. So we'll go into each of these in detail as to what could potentially be eligible, but it is pretty broad. And so one of the opportunities with the program is that it can finance a range of projects, but also one of the challenges is, with getting the word out, because it's a broad enough program that it doesn't always, register for people that this is a loan program that could fit with my project when we don't have every, single potential project listed as, what the program's for. So that's something that we're still ironing out, and, appreciate any collaboration and getting the word out, and really one-on-one discussions with potential applicants about, whether a project could fit into the program purposes. So I'm going to run through each of these areas and provide some examples of what it could include. That first bullet point had said energy infrastructure development, and really that's the electric or gas generation, transmission, storage, or distribution. And for some examples, we would see, if there's infrastructure for new generation or modernization projects, could be a virtual natural gas pipeline, carbon sequestration pilot projects, and some potential industrial location and expansion projects if there's some capacity constraints of a certain site and infrastructure is needed. You'll see on the right there, that last bullet point, that we want to avoid in those situations, a project that wouldn't be tied to one of our business development priorities, and we're focused, more on supporting advanced manufacturing, biosciences, and insurance and financial services. We could also, as another example, that last one, provide some financing for energy generation with a variety of public community users and benefits. So I won't go in through all of the do not include project examples, but I'll just highlight some of them as we go. And that first one is pretty important, that we're avoiding projects which are solar generation that is for, a private user that doesn't include additional innovative technologies and approaches. And really at this point, we're seeing, solar plus battery storage as being the most promising example of the type of project that this program could help finance. And we're in conversations with, some of those projects in the development currently, and still can support solar when it's, including something along those lines. So for the electric grid modernization, there's a few examples here that are kind of general, but really looking at, equipment to manage peak loads, some software potentially, something to optimize the use of energy generation, which may include fiber, but we're not just going to do fiber and broadband without it being connected to electric grid improvements. Energy workforce development was included in Iowa code as one of the program purposes, although that in and of itself is not, a project that gets constructed, but in thinking creatively and how to meet that intent, we would suggest that funds could be used to integrate workforce training or certification into that planning and construction, or integrating some way of hiring additional people to train them on a project, and if it's actually building something for building like a training facility for line workers or electricians to learn about some emerging energy technologies. This could be the type of purpose that is, in addition to another purpose being fulfilled when a project's actually built. But yeah, we'll just want to continue to, support this intent of the board and Iowa Code in whatever way possible. Next would be the emergency preparedness for rural and underserved areas. There's increasing interest and need for resiliency strategies to be implemented, and we have a few examples here of what could be implemented, but really there's a lot of development in this space, and we're always open to hearing what would be useful and what's emerging in terms of technologies in this space. The expansion of biomass, biogas, and renewable natural gas. Often we're really referring to anaerobic digesters and the associated equipment with those digesters. Those could be in livestock operation being used there, or potentially a wastewater treatment plant. Renewable natural gas is often the energy being generated from there, and there may be some upgrades to infrastructure to connect that production of the gas to another pipeline or the market. So we'd be looking at those types of projects under this purpose in most instances. For innovative technologies, some examples here would be energy storage, certainly battery energy storage, which is predominant in that space. Combined heat and power. We don't have a lot of combined heat and power in Iowa, and certainly there's a lot of interest and potential there, and this program could be an opportunity to finance that. District energy systems, microgrids, and innovative examples of what could occur with water and wastewater energy projects. And this is an area where water and wastewater utilities often would use potentially the SRF program, the State Revolving Fund, and that's federal money, and there's a variety of federal requirements with that. And this program in comparison to that could be really helpful if one of those entities wants to just do an energy related project at their site, or potentially do that separate from what they would use SRF for. So some examples of some innovative technologies there, but by no means is that an all-exhaustive list, as many of you probably know that if you work in energy, that there's just a lot changing in that particular space. So for development of infrastructure for alternative fuel vehicles, we're looking at electric vehicle charging stations, hydrogen fueling stations potentially. That we don't really have that in Iowa yet, but that could be coming quicker than we think potentially. And we're not doing ethanol or biodiesel storage or stations. Those don't really connect to the definition of energy infrastructure in the code with electricity or natural gas. So, so that's what we're looking at there. We have a few evaluation criteria that we've laid out, and we'll make sure that any project that comes into the program meets at least one of those criteria. But if demand for loans exceeds the funding available, we will use these criteria in our evaluation process. The first would be to demonstrate an economic impact to the local community and the state. The second would be to demonstrate a creative or innovative approach to a need or a problem. And the third, to demonstrate assistance is necessary from this program to reduce the project's risks. So those are the criteria, and our application asks for a narrative of how the project is meeting one or more of those criteria, and certainly the reviewers, staff, and our our board members can also discern what their interpretation is of how well those criteria have been met. So finally, the application process we have a iowagrants.gov is the website being used for this program and many others, and you have to create an account in order to access the application. The process for registering within Iowa Grants and getting that account can take several days, and you have to do that before you can begin on the application. And so we suggest doing that as soon as possible, and also to complete the application in advance of one of our deadlines. And if you wanted to just see a blank example of the application, I can provide that via PDF if you want to just become familiar with some of the questions that get asked. And a necessary part of the process as well is after you submit that application, it's really, still a pretty fluid process in terms of clarifying certain project details with staff, and really responding to those requests for more information in a timely manner is pretty important. And incomplete or ineligible applications could be denied by staff. We try to, communicate frequently with applicants, and occasionally someone might have like a single document that they wanted to upload to their application, and maybe they can get it a few days after the deadline, and we can certainly consider requests like that, and try to be as flexible as possible there, at least when the program isn't competitive in each round yet. Then the application is reviewed by staff and our loan committee, and the committee makes recommendations to the board. Sometimes the committee may have a need for more information, or there may be a recommendation that's slightly different from what the applicant requested, and we make sure to communicate any feedback like that back to the applicant. And one key example of that would be the loan term. If it's a loan that's recommended to the board, the loan committee may recommend a term that's shorter than what the applicant has requested. So the application IWA grants remains open, but we have these deadlines where you need to submit it before the deadline to be considered for a decision at the Iowa Energy Center board meeting. So this table shows the deadlines, and the first one's coming up in April, and we'll have the decisions on May 12th for the board. That's the plan for the next cycle, and you'll see the dates for the subsequent ones as well. So with that, I will turn it back to Jeff and see what questions you all may have at this point in time.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. We do have some questions real quick. I just wanted to say the interest rate on this was stated as 2%. Currently, the Wall Street Journal prime rate is 3.25%, and inflation from February of this year to February of last year is 7.9%. So just to reiterate, these interest rates are very, very good. It's essentially free money. So with that, we do have one question. First question comes in from Deb Bergen. Deb, I hope I'm saying your name right. Her question is, as to emergency preparedness, would cybersecurity upgrades or software be eligible?
Yes.
Gotcha. Good answer. Good answer. Okay, we have another question here from Bruce Greiner. His question is the carbon sequestration an initial requirement of the use of federal funds, or is that a requirement of Iowa?
Well, I guess if I didn't clarify, these funds are not federal, and it's a combination of state funding and utility revenues. So yeah, the carbon sequestration for this program, we mention it as one of the potential eligible projects, but it's not a requirement of any particular project. And so yeah, that's what I can provide on that. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, yep. We've got another question on the beginning, on the 7 project purposes that were listed in accordance with the Iowa Energy Plan. You said that they must fulfill at least one. Is preference given to projects that fulfill multiple of those goals or targets?
No, we haven't outlined any preferences or priorities. It's a good question. We've considered whether the board at some time may decide that a certain purpose is more important, or to the board, or maybe even a certain project type potentially. I mean, that sort of thing could happen, but especially when the program's new and there are a lot of needs out in the state and interest, we are keeping it open. And if there's more applications than we have funding for, the board may decide to create some priorities, and that's all to be determined.
Perfect. that sounds good. I believe that's all the questions. Oh, we have another question here. So here's another question. So why would energy efficiency with a more efficient piece of equipment be allowed as a form of carbon sequestration?
I don't believe I had that on any of my slides, so I'm not quite understanding the question.
Sure, maybe it was, would energy efficiency with more efficient equipment be allowed as a form of carbon sequestration? Maybe saying like, you know, if you use less energy, that means that there's less carbon associated with the generation of that energy. Would energy efficiency slide into it via that sort of argument?
Yeah, I think so far we've considered you know, energy efficiency types of projects to fit under innovative technologies, and similar to, you know, what the board has provided in regards to solar, you know, trying to you know, promote certain technologies that aren't already widespread across Iowa. I mean, certainly there's reasons people want to increase adoption of certain technologies, but really trying to see something innovative and unique that, you know, either isn't implemented as much in Iowa, and it could be a unique approach to Iowa, or, you know, newer technology into the market for energy efficiency. So we can certainly entertain and consider applications that would kind of put energy efficiency in that. But yeah, the carbon sequestration part of it hasn't really been discussed. So I can't, you know, personally speak to whether the board would see that fitting with that, but the application doesn't have any questions about carbon sequestration either. So I also would suggest like not overthinking that part of it, and being ready to share your project and how it meets one of those purposes that we've laid out.
Okay, yeah, and Stephanie, would it be correct to say that any of these folks could call you out a really set in stone project plan just to get an idea of whether or not it would qualify?
Sure, yes, definitely. Okay. Yep.
Great.
And sometimes if there's a project that we haven't thought of before, you know, I may need to consult with our legal counsel or others to see if it may be eligible. And in some instances, you know, we may need to visit with the loan committee about that, because ultimately they're the ones that are providing the recommendation to the board. And as staff, we just, you know, do our best to try to integrate the guidance and the information that we've been given so far, and clarify eligibility based on that.
Great answer. And with that in mind, everyone on this this webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the slides after the webinar is complete, which will include Stephanie's contact info, and you're very welcome to flood her inbox with questions and projects. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Stephanie.
Sure. So the next part of our discussion today is just some of the excuse me, some of the highlights from the infrastructure bill that passed, and we wanted to have the emphasis on grid modernization projects, and, you know, more on the electricity side of things that may be of interest to IAMU members, and we've been, you know, trying to follow as closely as we can, but with the big caveat that, you know, we don't know that much more on many of these programs yet, but we want to share what we do know so people can become, you know, more familiar with what is what's out there so far, although certainly this is just going to be kind of a slice of the pie. So for the overview of the IIJA, it became law in November of last year, and reauthorized surface transportation programs and authorized some new programs for water, energy, and broadband infrastructure, or provided funding to previously authorized programs. There was $110 billion of new funding for the next 5 years, and it's more than $62 billion for the U.S. Department of Energy, which is where, you know, a lot of the energy-related programs we will monitor will come through. And the website build.gov is available to learn about the IIJA, and on that website and on several other federal government websites. I've noticed that they're referring to it as the bipartisan infrastructure law. So as with many of these things, we developed the nomenclature over time, and I may still refer to it as both. So today we'll focus on certain programs, like I said, on electric grid modernization that may be of interest to munis. There's just too much to cover in one webinar, and I'm not pretending to be an expert on any of this or know where things will go next, but just beginning that dialogue. So, and one of the reasons for including this information is that in some instances, there may be a grant opportunity, and combining that with a loan from our program could really maximize the funds available and improve the feasibility for a project. We can find often that just getting a loan for a project isn't as enticing, especially if a project doesn't have a good payback. And so really trying to see what might be available for additional grant funds could also help our loan program advance some more projects in the state. We are monitoring the further guidance from the U.S. Department of Energy, and we'll be continuing to assess our involvement in those programs. But you know, at this point, you haven't seen all that much aside from some requests for information and some webinars and things that kind of go over what's in the legislation and what's also on that build.gov. But got to start somewhere. The first one that I'll mention is a program called Preventing Outages and Enhancing the Resilience of the Electric Grid. Within the bill, there's $5 billion in the program, and it's focused on grid hardening activities to reduce the likelihood and consequences of impacts to the electric grid from extreme weather, wildfires, and other natural disasters. I've put a long list of examples of projects that I won't go into great detail on. I removed some that related to forest fires, I believe. So we don't have that as much to worry about here as other parts of the country, but this really is focused on resilience, and application opening date would be in that later part of this year. And from what I've seen in some presentations for this, some of the funding could go to states, and then some of it could be, open solicitations from certain eligible applicants. So just because it says fourth quarter of 2022 doesn't necessarily mean that one of these projects could be applied for at that time, just depending on how those funds get allocated. And we're kind of waiting to learn more in that. But this is definitely of interest for obvious reasons, and also ties into the emergency preparedness purpose of our loan program. The second being referred to as program upgrading our electric grid and ensuring reliability and resiliency. $5 billion again in this program is available, and then to provide federal financial assistance for innovative approaches to transmission, storage, and distribution infrastructure, hardening and enhancing resilience and reliability, and demonstrating new approaches to enhance regional resilience. And we're expecting this to be a competitive national program, and we'll learn more in the later part of this year. The next is referred to as deployment of technologies to enhance grid flexibility. And as a related note, the titles of these that I'm putting in these slides is what the build.gov website database lists them as. So if you're searching for them on that webpage, I'll use those titles at the top, but sometimes they're actually referred to as something else. So as in this case, the Smart Grid Investment Matching Grant Program, there's $3 billion appropriated annually. And this grant program was actually established in 2007 and funded by the Recovery Act. So it has some history and is being funded through the IIJA. And these are activities that allow buildings to engage in demand flexibility or smart grid related functions. There's some qualifying investments from the 2007 language that enables smart grid functions. I have tried my best to summarize some of those activities in this list so you can get a sense of what is covered, but some of these descriptions can get quite wordy, so I tried to keep it brief. It may not include everything, but gives you a sense of what the program initially authorized. And then in that previous round, smart meters and projects related to AMI were common in that kind of previous go round. But with this particular law, the definition was expanded for smart grid functions to include data analytics. And an example of that would be to allow operational fiber and wireless broadband for data flow between different components, such as the components that may have been included in that earlier authorizing language. So there's been some expansion of that program, and we'll wait to see when that comes out, but a lot of these are anticipated to see something later part of this year. So this next one is referred to as charging and fueling infrastructure grants, and specifically corridor charging. And nationally, there's 1.25 billion. It's known as the National Electric Vehicle Formula Program, NEVI would be the acronym there. And it is intended to deploy publicly accessible infrastructure along designated alternative fuel corridors with really an apparent focus on electric vehicle charging. The legislation lists a few different fueling types that would be eligible, but so far, a lot of the planning discussions is focused on fast charging for electric vehicles. So in Iowa, we have federally designated alternative fuel corridors that have come about through that, the Federal Highway Administration program for those corridors. And our office has worked on those in coordination with Iowa DOT for a number of years to designate basically Iowa's interstate system for the most part to be designated alternative fuel corridors. So we're well covered on those corridors to have them primed for that investment. And certainly there are some fast charging stations already on those corridors. But the goal with those alternative fuel corridors is to have stations less than 50 miles apart, so 50 miles or less along those corridors. And now the guidance says that each of those stations should be within 1 mile of the corridor. It'll be necessary to have direct current fast charging at those sites, and at least 4 ports that are 150 kW each that are capable of charging 4 vehicles simultaneously. So that would be 600 kilowatts. So that's a lot of power capacity needed at those sites. And so the coordination and involvement and input of utilities, especially those that are serving those corridor locations, is very important. So if and when those corridors are fully developed, utilizing these program funds or other resources, the state can propose alternative public locations for this funding. And there's also, open rounds even right now to nominate additional alternative fuel corridors. So we'll kind of see what happens next with that, but we have a lot of interstates that have not been filled in thus far with that, criteria that's been laid out. So the state DOTs are intended to be the administrators of this funding, and they're encouraging, the federal government's encouraging coordination with state energy offices in the program. And the next really key milestone for the NEVI formula is for the state to submit plan to the federal government by August 1st on the use or planned use of the funds, not necessarily project specific, but there are certain aspects of the plan that there's guidance that clarifies what should be in those plans. So next, there is another program for community charging, and there's more of a grant process that is intended for that, not necessarily a formula that goes to the different states. And with that program, it's really enabling EV charging and alternative fueling locations in various locations like public roads, schools, parks, publicly accessible parking facilities. And there's really a priority for certain areas that would be like rural areas, low to moderate income area neighborhoods, communities with low ratios of private parking, sorry for the typo there, or high ratios of multi-unit dwellings. So those are going to be more targeted and competitive, is what we are anticipating now. But we're still monitoring this and thought this could also be of interest to municipal utilities, and then this potentially could be something where municipal utility may be able to apply directly for that. It's all to be determined based on the guidance, but something to keep in mind if this interests you. So I wanted to also kind of let you know a few opportunities to stay informed. I see we have some questions in the chat. Do we want to take those now, Jeff, before we go into just some further resources?
Yeah, I think we answered some questions there. I've actually got a question. So a lot of these application opening dates were stated to be, fourth quarter, just very vaguely. And I totally understand that's not your doing. That's just kind of the way these things roll out. But my only concern and my feedback would be that these grant windows stay open for a considerable amount of time. And I don't even really know if this is a question or feedback, but for example, with grants like the Iowa Energy Center, competitive grants, there are changes, like you said. The board recommends change each year, but for the most part, it's essentially the same, and we know what's coming. We have all year to prepare. There's kind of a rolling list in the back of my mind of, oh, I'm going to apply for this year, But with these grants, they're entirely new, right? Entirely new programs. And so do you guys have a sense, or has there been any feedback from the federal government about how long these grant windows will stay open?
Not that I've heard, but I can certainly add that to what I intend to, or what I can try to monitor and get back to you, okay, when I hear some of that.
Great. Yeah, I'm thinking of assisting our members and assisting 100 and however many members at once with the same grant when we don't really know about it. Yeah. We have another question that came in here from Bruce. Bruce says, on the infrastructure grants for EV charging, does the way the electric is generated matter?
I don't think I haven't heard that's a criteria in those programs. So I don't think that, so far from what I've heard, I don't believe so. I do want to circle back one thing with what you had asked about, Jeff, is in terms of an organization like you being prepared. Although we don't have any plans that are set in stone, and our office isn't committing to anything right now. But with some of these programs, there could be funds coming to our office, and then the state would have to apply for them, or sign something, or do whatever the process is, depending on what that entails. But in that instance, it could be the state doing that legwork in the fall, and then developing a program to open up to applications for projects in Iowa. So that's another way that some of this could play out. And certainly with that NEVI formula, it's already very clear that the DOT would be the one to initially receive the funds and then have a program to grant it out.
Gotcha. We've got another question here from Bruce Greiner, VHF Sales, is an associate member of ours. His question is, who will own the charging stations? Will it be a private corporation or the government?
We are, good question. I haven't seen any requirements around that, but I don't anticipate it's not going to be the federal government, I don't think, and I don't think it'll be the state government. Whether a municipal utility might own one of the stations, that's certainly maybe a possibility, but I don't know the various kind of regulatory aspects or investor-owned utility potentially. So yeah, it's I think a lot of that's to be determined, but I don't think there hasn't been a strong preconceived rule around that from the federal government.
Yeah, I assume it would be whoever applies for the grant would own it, because they're getting paid grant dollars to purchase equipment. So any other questions from anyone? For some reason, if you couldn't put it in the chat, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. I do have one more question here. I don't see a lot of EV in Iowa, and especially in low income / multi-income family residences. Any idea why that area is targeted? Sort of a build it and they will come approach?
I'm not sure about why, but I've certainly seen with this particular, the infrastructure bill, there's been an emphasis generally on how to reach, disadvantaged communities and populations, and a goal surrounding equity and things along those lines. How that plays out in terms of, the charging stations, I'm not too sure about that. But yeah, I can, fully acknowledge that, the price of electric vehicles is out of reach for many low-income households. And so, somehow need to, at least make sure that we're aware of that in the process and kind of align as well as much as we can. Perfect.
So here's a question from Jim Currens. Is the DOT installing in the corridor areas? I think to answer part of that question would be, there's two different grants. There's community charging, which I would be more like sort of in town. And then there's corridor charging, which I believe would be more within aisle of those targeted corridors, which if you give me one sec. For the state of Iowa, do you remember what those were, Stephanie?
Yeah, we have I-29, I-80, I-380, I-35. I kind of listed those out on the slides. Those are the interstates. In terms of who would actually be doing the construction, just because of the way the question is worded, I would not be assuming the DOT would be doing that, that it would be more of a grant program that would, select projects that would then use whomever their labor of choice would be. So yeah, and some of that work in terms of granting out funds for charging stations has already been happening under the Volkswagen settlement through the Iowa Department of Transportation, and
yes,
so the emphasis on that, on those corridors, and so there's already a program model through that has been established to some extent, but certainly can incorporate everything for NEVI and other planning needs.
Yep, and I would just add on, if anyone is interested in Volkswagen grant funds, cycle 3 VW grant fund window for the third cycle is open. It's been open since February 18th. That window does close on April 8th. So if you need any help with that, anyone on this webinar, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, and in that the open cycle for Volkswagen, that's targeting some other corridors in the state in terms of the fast charging. I don't have those kind of off the top of my head, but has some other corridors identified. And I think, with the thought that the NEVI program funds could be targeted or potentially limited to the interstates. So there are some other corridors identified, they're highways, and then there's a availability for community charging for level 2 that aren't necessarily the high powered fast charging stations, but could still be deployed in communities to, help with visitors or other public charging needs that you may have. So funding is available for both of those areas.
Perfect. I think we may be out of. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, got a few minutes left, I think. So
sorry. Go ahead.
That's all right. These are just a few general slides. I always like to, if I can, end with giving people the opportunity to okay, how am I going to keep on the loop on these things? How can I become more educated, or what's next? So I wanted to let you know that the Department of Energy's Office of Electricity has a lot going on, and there's this Building a Better Grid initiative, and that initiative launched on January 12th, and you can find out more information on their website. And my understanding of that initiative is to help be somewhat of an umbrella way to kind of tie all of these several of these new programs to this initiative. And there's going to be a way to identify critical national transmission needs and support build out through planning and financing. And there's a national transmission planning study that's actually kicking off at noon Central, and this national transmission planning study will be like informing some of the future efforts of that office, and really, you know, an opportunity to be engaged and learn and attend some webinars if you're able, if that's applicable to you. And then another area in their office that they're doing some outreach on is resilient power grids. And one example there is a webinar coming up on March 22nd on strategically undergrounding power lines. And this webinar is basically 3.5 hours long. So it's going to go pretty in depth with how to evaluate some of the costs versus the value of undergrounding certain power lines. And various utilities, local state regulators will be in attendance presenting, and an expert from one of the DOE national labs. So it's a good opportunity to kind of go in depth there. I have seen through some of my engagement with these meetings or webinars, you know, they're getting longer as we go, because there's just a lot of in-depth information, and definitely, you know, the folks in the federal agencies are aware of, you know, these big investments are about to happen, and they're really trying to be strategic and provide information and do what they can in that regard beyond just getting the money out the door. So, so that webinar is coming up. And then on the electric vehicle charging side, there's a joint office of energy and transportation that has been established that is, you know, created by the bill to facilitate collaboration between the US DOE and the US Department of Transportation. The website is driveelectric.gov, and it's a very good website that has a variety of resources. There's maps of the corridors, there's kind of a timeline of activities of what's happened since the passage of the law, and they also plan to facilitate technical assistance and collaboration through that office, including technical assistance for utilities and some of the capacity that is needed at you know, some of these sites that have pretty high requirements along corridors. So that will be interesting to see what they offer and what comes next in that area, and I'll definitely be trying to monitor that as well. So you can also sign up for news alerts on that in that federal office as well. So plenty to kind of keep looped in there. And then finally, just to give a little bit of an Iowa opportunity through this webinar, is there's a workshop next Thursday, March 24th in Des Moines. Not necessarily focused on grid infrastructure, but something energy related if you weren't aware. And there'll be a reception the night before, and it's being put together by the University of Northern Iowa's Iowa Waste Reduction Center in partnership with the Iowa Association of Energy Efficiency. So attendees will learn about energy efficiency, electrification, and hydrogen in Iowa. Our office is not necessarily a sponsor of this, but I have included the agenda for my one visual in this slide deck. So, so I hope you can get a little bit of a flavor of what the topics will be there. And there's a website for more information and how to register. So with that, we'll kind of see if there's any further questions, and really appreciate everyone's time.
Awesome, great. Yeah, I would just add, I'll be at that workshop on Thursday next week, and I'll see some of our members there. The speaker, Eric Woodruff, is a really great national speaker, and it's exciting that he's going to be in town and talking to all of us. So if there's any other questions, you're welcome to come in the chat or unmute yourself. I have a question here that I wanted to ask too. So for the charging and fueling infrastructure grants, the corridor charging, there was a section that said if/when corridors are fully developed, the state can propose alternative public locations. I can imagine that through the VW grant, our corridors are getting pretty developed. Do you guys have a sense on how developed, how close we are to expanding those corridors?
Great question. You know, since I'm not in the weeds on that as much as some colleagues of mine have been,
Gotcha.
I don't really have a good answer. I know that, certainly there's some stations that may be planned but not fully installed or commissioned yet too. But yeah, I think that there's certainly a gap analysis that I think will be forthcoming as part of that plan that would be submitted to that joint office. So, but yeah, we have seen, a lot of station development, and I think one question that I don't quite know the answer to, but some of the stations along the corridors don't meet that specification of the 150 kW and all of that. And so maybe someone, maybe the answer's out there already, but not really sure whether what has been installed will meet the criteria or how that will be factored in.
Okay, gotcha. Any other questions out there?
I do think that, one more thought on that, because I'm sorry, I just have to stew on a little
no
bit.
worries.
But I would, also encourage you to look at that, the current guidance on the Volkswagen settlement. I wasn't really prepared to speak much to it in this webinar, but fair questions. I think that I'm pretty sure the I-29 is, one that is listed there just because that hasn't been getting as much of the build out. So
I see.
And I think that that's on there for this particular round, because it wasn't too long ago that one was designated. So it's definitely an area where more is needed. There's actually some infrastructure down in the Missouri segment of that. It's a process that requires thinking about our neighbors in other states, because you get to the Iowa border, So yeah, more is needed to really fill that out.
Absolutely. Well, just a reminder to everyone, we will send out the slides that will include Tiffany's contact info. And if you have any questions, or really if you're even like, hey, I have this project, does it qualify for this? I would encourage you to reach out to her in the early stages of the project, because the folks in that office are very helpful. And the earlier you reach out, sometimes the better prepared you can be to secure some of those funds. So thanks again to everyone for attending this webinar. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel to watch on demand. It is 12 o'clock. Noon on that, and I'll wish you all a good rest of your afternoon. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.